Hi, welcome to your first geometry lecture. Today we're going to be talking about the building blocks of geometry. And if you remember from class, we learned about geometry, that it's the study of shape, size, position of figures, and properties of space. Now, in the beginning of class, we talked about how we can see geometry in artwork. And so I'm just going to flash through these as a reminder to you. And what all these paintings and artworks have in common with each other is that they're all composed of different building blocks of geometry. Things like points, things like lines, planes, polygons, segments, and we're going to talk about those building blocks of geometry right now. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and title your notes The Building Blocks of Geometry. Now, before I get into the lecture, I just want to highlight what's really cool about doing this video lecture thing. What's cool is that you can use this video and go at your own pace. If you'd like, you could speed things up and go as fast as you'd like. If you kind of take a longer time to process math, you can pause the video, repeat it, play it back again, to make sure you really understand what you're learning, and then move on at your own speed. So whatever I write down on these notes, I want you to copy. And this information is supposed to be really helpful for you in doing your homework and doing what we do in class. So, okay, so back to the lecture. I want you to go ahead and title your notes Building Blocks of Geometry. And what we discussed in class was the building blocks of geometry are composed of points, lines, and planes. So let's go ahead and write that down. And in this lecture today, I'm going to go over exactly what points, lines, planes, segments, midpoints, and all these building blocks are, and then how we label and name them in geometry. Okay. So the very basic building block of geometry are points. Okay? So that's what we're going to start off with right now. Points. So points are dots that represent a location, but not a size. So points aren't really big or aren't really small. They just represent like a location on this earth. So for example, I could have a dot here, or a dot that represents the location here. Oops, that was more than a dot, but you get the idea. Or a dot that represents the location here, or here, or there. Now, what if we wanted to point out to our friend what that location was? What we use is we use letters to represent these different locations. So, for example, I want to label this point P. Or I could label this point Q. Or I could label this point R. And so when I'm talking to my friends and I'm trying to refer to a certain location on my paper, I could say, hey, point P, that's what I'm talking about. Or point R, that's what I'm talking about. So those are points. Okay. Now, what if you have a bunch of points all together? Okay, one point right after the other. What happens is that you create what we call a line. Okay, so let's write that down. a line. So what a line is really is a straight, continuous arrangement of points. And so if you look at this line, there are points in a straight, continuous line, one after the other. And if you put them all together, they make a line. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and make a line with the computer. And all lines go on forever and ever. And so that's why we put these arrows on them. Okay, so I'll do another example. We have another line that looks like this. And since it goes on and on and on and on and on and on all the way off this computer screen and all the way in that direction off the computer screen, we put arrows on it. And the way we name lines is we pick 2 points on the line, any 2 points really, and that's how we refer to the line. So for example, if this was point A and this was point B, I would refer to this line like this, line A, B. And since it's a line, the symbol for the line is this. It's a short little line or segment with arrows on the top. And it doesn't matter what order I name the line in. I've named the line this time around using A first and then B next. But if I wanted to, I can name the line B, A. And I would be referring to the same line. Or for example, say like I had this line right here on my paper and I saw that this point was point C and this point right here was point D. I can name this line using 2 ways. I can name it CD, or I can name it DC. And that would be the same thing. Okay, so next we have a plane. And I'm not talking about an airplane. I'm talking about any 2D flat surface that extends forever into space. So let's write this down. It's a flat surface that extends forever, has no thickness, and is 2-dimensional, 2D. And this computer screen right here is an example of a plane, or a piece of paper is an example of a plane if you're not considering the thickness of a piece of paper. So I'm going to draw a couple examples of planes as well. So, for example, a plane could look like this. Or, if a plane's kind of going in a different direction, you could draw it like this. And then let's just get rid of this part right here. Okay, cool. And the way that we name planes is we use letters. And just like we name dots, we're going to use points to name the planes. Okay. So where these 2 lines intersect, it's actually a point. Let's call it point E. And let's call this point F. And let's call this point G. And let's call this point H. Now, to name a plane, you want to use the points that make up the corners of the plane. So, to name this, I would name it plane E, F, G, H. I could also name it in a different order. I could do like plane H, E, F, G. Or plane G, F, E, H, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Another way to name a plane is just if the plane actually has a letter in it, like say like there was this plane right here, there's a letter Q, I can name it plane Q as well. Let's try another example. Say like this plane, the corner right here, the vertex was named A, and this was point B, and this was point C, and this is point D. I can name this plane A, B, C, D. Or in a different order, D, C, B, A. So on and so forth. And if there is actually a letter in this plane, just like, in the corner or something, P, I could also refer to this plane as plane P. It's pretty simple. We've just talked about the building blocks of geometry, points, lines, and planes, and we've drawn what they look like, and we've even learned how to name them. So now we're going to dive a little deeper, and we're going to talk about the parts of a line. So go ahead and title your next section, Parts of Lines. So the first part of a line that we're going to talk about is what we call a line segment. And a line segment is simply made up of 2 points, which we call endpoints, and all the points of the line between them. So I'll do an example. Okay, so say like I have this line. And I'm sorry it's not straight, but I can't draw it very straight. And say like we have point A right here, and we have point B. Now, this is a line because it has arrows and all these points continuously go. But the segment part of it is simply made up of A all the way through B. And it's made up of all the points in between. So the way we draw a segment is we draw the endpoints A and B, and we draw all the points in between them. All these points. We also name a line segment very similar to the way that we name a line. Instead of naming a line segment with arrows on top, we name the segment without arrows. And just like lines, where we can name it with 2 letters in any order that we want to, we can name this line segment in any letter of orders that we want to as well. Okay, so this right here is the proper way to name a line segment. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about midpoints. Midpoints are pretty simple. What a midpoint is, it's a point on a segment that divides it into half. I'll do an example. Okay, so pretend I have segment A, B. And pretend that AB is equal to 10 centimeters. If I divide 10 in half, I get 5, right? Because 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now the point that's at that halfway mark right here, say like it's point C, is what we call the midpoint. And because point C is there, it would break up this line segment into two halves, which are 5 centimeters and 5 centimeters each. Okay, so we call this point the midpoint. Or we could say point C is the midpoint of segment A, B. And that's the midpoint. Okay, so coplanar. Again, coplanar, co means together, and plane means plane. So the definition of this word means points on the same plane. Pretty simple, right? So I will draw you an example. We have this plane right here. Plane, let's just call it A, B, C, and D. And on plane A, B, C, and D, we have point D, point E, and point F. And off the plane, we have point G somewhere else in space. So what we would say is that point D, E, and F are coplanar because they're together on the same plane. They're together on plane A, B, C, and D. Point G, since it's off the plane, is not coplanar. Okay, and that's it for today's lesson. Don't forget to put your notes in the note section. Put notes in notes section of your binder. Okay? And now that you've taken your notes, don't forget to go to your packet and complete pages 2 and pages 3 on what you just learned. Okay? And come to class with any questions that you may have about the homework assignments. And tomorrow I'm going to give you a quiz based on the notes that you've learned. And don't hesitate to ask me questions. Alright? Good luck!